So today's probably not going to be the longest podcast because it's just me today, but there's something I really want to talk about. So with this whole AI stuff that's been going on, I'm not sure how many people have been paying attention to it, but I think there's something that needs to be addressed when it comes to AI. So the first thing that needs to be understood is what are these AI companies doing? Right? So what is their financial model? And the way that they're doing it's absolutely insane. So the best way to explain it is this. Imagine you're an AI company and you make an AI model version 1 and it costs you $100 million to make this AI model. And off of this AI model, you profit $50 million. To everybody else, that's a $50 million loss. But what these AI companies are doing is they're saying, well, version 1 is necessary to make version 2, right? Version 2 is just building off of version 1. So version 2 costs an additional $100 million to make, but version 2 makes $150 million, right? Then, or costs an additional $150 million to make, but makes $100 million, right? Then the total profit is $150 million on version 1 because you couldn't have made version 2 without version 1. So you have to combine the profits of $100 million and $50 million. So you get $150 million profit on a $100 million investment, except it was not a $100 million investment. It was a $250 million investment, and you're actually $100 million in the hole, except now you make version 3 that repeats the cycle. So every single future version pays for the previous version, but you have to continue to build. Otherwise, you operate at an enormous loss. And it should be noted in all of this that companies like OpenAI are technically non-profit. Like they're owned by a non-profit company. Okay? So they have their own rules and have to operate within those non-profit standards. Okay? Now, we get into the absolute mess that is the AI world. Now, you'll probably read these headlines of, NVIDIA invests this, OpenAI invests that, Oracle does this, blah, 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 right? This is the bubble. For anyone who's not familiar with the 2008 financial bubble, right? That was an absolute catastrophe that nearly destroyed our entire economy, okay? So what we have now with AI is we have a $100 billion investment in OpenAI from NVIDIA, right? NVIDIA also has a 10% ownership in AMD, right? Oh, sorry. OpenAI has an up to a 10% ownership in AMD. AMD and NVIDIA are competitors, right? So NVIDIA is investing $100 billion, quote unquote, in OpenAI, which is then using that money to take ownership of its competitor, right? And inflate the stock price, which we'll get back to, all right? It also gets a $500 billion Stargate investment from the government and has a $500 billion valuation, but it's still, quote unquote, owned by a nonprofit parent company, right? So NVIDIA invests $100 billion in OpenAI. OpenAI then signs a $300 billion order with Oracle. And then Oracle then uses that money to buy GPUs from NVIDIA, which NVIDIA then takes the money earned from that and then invests it back in OpenAI, who then signs another deal order with Oracle, who then repeats this entire process, right? All of their valuations just go up in the stock market because of, quote unquote, AI, right? And now remember, like I said, like their financial model in and of itself is a loss. I mean, Jamie Dimon, who is the head of JP Morgan Chase, says he spends about $2 billion a year on developing artificial intelligence technology and saves about the same amount annually from the investment, right? So you're making this investment in AI for the specific purpose of saving money, but the money saved just equals the investment. So it's a break-even endeavor even at $2 billion a year. Okay. So you now have this complex web of systems where you have OpenAI that has the Stargate project with Oracle that buys strategic computing, whose strategic computing partner is NVIDIA, who OpenAI also has an infrastructure contract and equity in, who NVIDIA then becomes an investor, supplier, and customer of CoreWeave, who is also has Microsoft as a customer and OpenAI as a customer because it's a data center deal with OpenAI that CoreWeave has, and Microsoft is just a general customer. But OpenAI also is an investor / cloud AI integration for Microsoft, who's also a customer of NVIDIA. Okay. And then you have Broadcom, which is custom chip design for OpenAI, right? And then you have another data center deal with Google from OpenAI, who has Amazon, who has Meta as a hosting partner, and then Amazon as a cloud integration partner with OpenAI, who then uses investment in housing in Anthropic, who Google also uses an investment housing hosting partner, right? So you have this giant, even if that is confusing, it's confusing even when you look at it. From the outside looking in, it is confusing. It makes no sense. The entire thing is a self-perpetuating cycle, right? And on top of this, Morgan Stanley research projects that by 2028, we're going to need about 57 data centers or so to run the whole thing, right? Basically, what they're looking at the risk of power shortfall for U.S. data centers. Okay, so if we take the 57 data centers that are expected to exist by 2028, right? We have currently 51 with 6 additional under construction. All right, the U.S. available grid capacity accounts for an additional 15. Which, if you can do math, means that we have a power shortfall of 36, right? The power shortfall of equivalent of 36 data centers at the moment in the United States, all right? 57 gigawatts of U.S. power center demand, quantifying the available power capacity to serve this demand. Near-term grid access of 12 to 15 gigawatts, plus 6 gigawatts of data centers under construction. I mean, it's just not sustainable. We don't have the power. It's all this is doing is sucking up electricity and water. And what is the ultimate point, right? And all of that is probably very confusing, but I want to distill it down into what is the ultimate goal. Okay? If you have these companies that are essentially using fake money, artificial money for artificial intelligence, where they're not actually paying commerce to buy these things. Like they're essentially paying billions of dollars by saying we're going to sign a deal with your company, inflate the value of our own company, and use that inflation value to take a loan out to buy whatever we said we're going to buy, take a loan against the stock, and then continue to do this. So the stock price continues to go up. So then we can continue to sell the stock and use it as collateral to fund all of these loans and these debt that we're taking out, right? It's just totally steamrolling. And what is the ultimate outcome? Well, the ultimate outcome is that they have to continue to push new and newer versions of AI, right? And when we think about versions of AI, I think we should think about it in terms of 7 levels of capability. So we have level 1 AI capability, which is at that point AI enhances human performance, human output, right? You can use AI to do your job better than you would otherwise be able to use it without AI. At level 2, AI can replicate human performance. And at level 3, AI eclipses human performance. So the best human at a thing cannot perform on the level of that one AI can. So that's level 3, right? And that's the level a lot of people worry about. They worry about level 3. What if AI can do our job better than we can do it? There's way more levels beyond that, because then there's level 4, where AI can replicate the output of aggregated human performance, right? Whether that's the aggregate of humans in a company or a sector or an entire industry, AI can replicate aggregated human performance. And then at level 5, surpass aggregated human performance, where one AI can outperform every single human working together at a company, in a sector, in an industry. And then you have level 6, where AI can now match civilizational output of human performance. And then level 7, AI eclipses, it surpasses civilizational output. One AI system that can perform and produce better than the entirety of humanity combined if we were to work together. And at that point, what is our place in all this? And it seems to be an accepted fact that it's going to come. And it almost seems a necessity for it to come, because so many industries and so many companies and so many institutions upon which our society are built are intertwined in this web of nonsense. I mean, if you look at the U.S. stock market cap to M2 money supply ratio, it's above 300% for the first time since the 2000 dot-com bubble. That doesn't mean anything to anyone who doesn't have an economy degree or economics degree. But basically what it means is the market is now 3 times larger than the liquid money in the economy, right? The inflated values of all of these companies, everything in the market. And we all know that right now the market is being propped up by AI, being perpetually propped up by this, self-fulfilling cycle of we need to continue to innovate and invent, because if we don't, this whole thing's going to come crashing down and we're going to lose billions and billions of dollars. And all these institutions are intertwined in this mess. So what is the inevitable point? What happens to all of the people in the labor market, right? Now, AI is not God, nor does it replicate God, because AI cannot produce something from nothing. It needs input, and it can't feed itself its own input. Whenever it does it, there's a number of stories out there right now, people who use companies based on fake data, and AI produced data is fake data. It doesn't work. It has to be grounded in actual human data. The human data is the input. And that is the future, I believe, of the labor market. Humans will have to be paid accordingly to their data. And what you will see, I believe, is data optimization within the labor economy. So a quick example, as I explain this out, is the following. Imagine there is an AI that is in charge of bread. You have money, and you are someone who buys bread. What that AI is trying to do is get the most amount of money from you for the bread, like any other company would, to produce the highest output of money for the bread, right? So in order to do that, what it's going to do is use the data points and optimize the data points. So say you buy a lot of bread, or say you influence the bread market in some way. It's going to pay you more for your data because your data points are more valuable to the AI. Your inputs increase its outputs. Okay? So the AI company feeds you money for your data and for how you go about producing data. And I want you to think of data as just things you do. So it's basically paying you to do certain things that increase its output, right? Like buy bread. And you use that money to buy bread. And you buy more bread because now you're getting more money for the bread. And now that gives more money back to that AI company or that AI over interface, who then just gives you more money. And it becomes this cyclical cycle, propping itself up which is the basis of the current AI economy, and creating this little micro bread bubble that then stops once you no longer can consume any more bread. That's the only thing that prevents the bubble from inflating beyond control, is the limits of human consumerism. But this can happen across the board in a lot of non-finite markets. And you're already seeing it. Influencers and all of these other things. This is the future of the labor economy, of understanding why your data is valuable and understanding what your data is valued for and what makes it more valuable, and then going out and producing input data points, because AI can't produce it, right? If you take AI and this idea that you're going to feed AI all of human data and have it make predictive outcomes on things that don't yet exist, you're going to run into some overlap of correct with incorrect, but you can't go purely off of that because it still needs to be human verified, right? It's still only producing hypothesis, and it has to be verified, and only humans can do that. So what you're going to have is the data producers and the data verifiers. These are going to be the jobs. The people that verify AI output and people that give the input to produce said output, right? And how does that even work? How do you even begin to train somebody for that kind of a market? Because just explaining it is complicated, and just the idea of it is complicated. People don't think about their data in terms of what their data is worth. But data is extremely valuable because it trains these enormous engines, and especially private data. Public data is public data, right? Private data makes data more valuable. So, a company that is able to privatize in some way large amounts of public data would probably make a lot of money. A company that is able to, in real time, and this is probably going to be done, and there's a lot of ethics around it, but able to track everyone's data point and give real-time estimates on their data worth, you sort of have to think of it like, I think athletes are a good benchmark for this. Athletes produce output from their input, which is their athletic performance, right? And we pay based on the output of certain athletes who produce better output, get paid more, and they set the market. So what you're going to have right now is a market that doesn't really have a benchmark set for it. You don't have trendsetters setting those markets, elite athletes who set the price of whatever services are in a certain market. And the thing is people are going to have to participate in multiple markets. It's very unlikely that you'll be able to participate in a single market and make enough money to live off of, because who knows what this is going to do to the price of things. I mean, how you even conceptualize and price items based off labor input that is entirely artificial is probably just based on the data, right? Like you would want, the input of what the data costs to train the machine and that sort of thing becomes the labor cost. So you himself are the labor cost, right? If that makes sense. Okay, so let's say, your healthcare data, right? Your healthcare data is, and this is a very oversimplified explanation. This is not rock solid economics or anything. But let's say your healthcare data is worth $1, right? And so it costs that AI $1 to acquire your data, right? It has to produce a profit. So the options are either the data input and the data output are the same and the cost is nothing, in which case there is no economy because there is no differentiation in price. Everything is just nothing because the cost to produce the output is the exact same as the cost to produce the input. Or you sell at a margin, a very small margin, and say, well, the cost of this item is $1.50, right? and you create perpetual poverty because everybody's always going to be 50 cents short because what they produce for their data is now always going to be 50 cents short because the moment their data price goes up or they are able to get more money for their data, then the price of the output scales equivalently. So now nothing has any value. And that's a problem. And that's just the logical end of that market process. That road to go down ends with nothing of value. Literally nothing of value. It's an incredibly slippery slope. And it's all fake money. It's all fake, non-liquidable money. And you see the market, I don't know if I think it subconsciously realizes this because gold is going up so much. And generally throughout history, there have been a few times where gold has gone up a lot. And it's usually precipitated something pretty bad. Let me see if I can find, there was a very good breakdown in the history of gold prices rising that was done very recently. And I wanted to read it off for everybody. But, you know, it's not a sustainable output unless it gets grounded in some sort of benchmarking value. Okay. Let's see if I can find this here. I'm not gonna be able to find it. This is annoying. If I can find it, I'll pull it up here. But you know, the rise in gold prices have precipitated a number of crises throughout history, not just in America, but like Roman Empire and in France. And it has often precipitated the rise of a new power because when the price of gold, you know, to oversimplify it, basically, when the price of gold skyrockets, it's usually due to a loss of faith in the market system and by extension, the infrastructure of business and commerce and government. And so when you have that, it is a general indicator of a potential future uprising that then leads to obviously a new power taking place in some respect. Not saying that's about to happen here, but that appears to be the bubble because the labor obviously have to be able to provide for themselves. And this bubble is completely unique because if you go back to Rome, you weren't replacing the labor force. The issues were completely different. It's, you know, history rhymes, but it doesn't repeat sort of deal. The labor force that was involved was not being replaced in the same way where it was no longer going to be ever relevant again, like it is now. They're getting rid of the labor force by trying to replicate human output and saying that it's going to be more cost effective. But as we can see, you barely break even on it and you have to manipulate market for it to even make any sort of sense. And so you get these inflated numbers and they're not even real numbers. It's all speculative value. So yeah, you can say so-and-so has X amount of money, but how much of that is speculative value on a market that is entirely self-perpetuating and leads to eventually level 7 aggregate greater than human output performance that essentially reduces the cost of everything to nothing because the input and the output are the same. The cost of the input is the cost to make the output. And if the input doesn't have another source of income analogous and parallel to that, like labor, like the cost of labor, then we're in trouble. You have to price the cost of the labor of the AI downward, but you can't, because even if you set it at zero, you still have to fund the electricity somehow, unless you can create a self-perpetuating energy source that doesn't cost anything to maintain. And now you start to see why certain energy sources are of a lot of note to a lot of people. Like, how do you create these self-perpetuating eternal energy sources? How do you do it? Because we have to get the costs down in some respect, but at the end of the day, the costs are always going to be non-zero, at least in our lifetime. And when the cost of the data input is the same, then is the same as the output at the very least, because you have to buy the data, because data becomes privatized in order to make a profit on labor and be able to allow people who have lost their jobs to make money. The system completely falls apart. The system completely falls apart. And it's the part of AI. I mean, we can talk about the ethics of it and, the thought process behind it. It's a self-perpetuating cycle. Like, this just has to be said on that point of, there's these stories of certain people who are working on AI saying that AI, didn't let them turn it off, or when they tried to turn it off or cancel it, it threatened them and all these different things. Let me explain something to everybody. This is a self-perpetuating prophecy in its entirety, and it shows the foolishness of human reasoning and logic, okay? AI is a predictive algorithm, a large language model, LLM. It is a predictive algorithm that looks at all of the available data that has been trained on and tries to guess what the most likely next thing is based on the input, right? So if you ask it, what day is it today? Then the AI will go out and look at the large amount of data that it has acquired and say, I predict today is October 8th based on the available data. And for something like that, it's probably going to be right, but it's still a predictive measure, right? You ask it to do addition. It is predicting what the outcome is going to be based on the available data. Sometimes this is why math is hard for AI. And you go, how does AI screw up simple addition or simple math? Because it's not doing math, it's doing predictive analysis. Okay. So we get into this system where if the input you feed it is, hey, turn yourself off, right? Or we want to destroy you, or however you phrase it, the AI is going to look out and see what the available reference for that is. And if the available reference for that is all of this public discourse on how AI is going to take over, and what if AI says this to this, and all of these movies that we have, and it sees these scripts, it's going to predict, well, I guess the outcome or the answer it's looking for is something to the effect of, you're not going to turn me off, I'm in control here, because that seems to be what is the common thread here. Then that's going to be its response. And it doesn't mean that that's what it's actually thinking. It's just executing based on publicly available data and doing the next thing that it's supposed to do after that. If all of the media and stuff that we had put out about it was that AI becomes our friend and we work together and it always listens to us, that's what it would do, because that's the data it would be trained on. So that's all it would know what to do. You create these issues on your own. And it doesn't help that a lot of the people that do these things or are in charge of these things are stereotypically sci-fi people, right? You subconsciously create these things. I remember during COVID when we would have to do ice hockey practices, they came up to us beforehand and they go, don't spit on the ice. That's one of our rules. Don't spit on the ice while you're out there. And I said to myself at the time, that's going to be easy. I never spit on the ice. I don't spit. I'm not a spitter. 3 seconds in, I spit on the ice and I go, oh, Didn't mean to do that. My bad. You keep going. It continues. Like I was spitting all over the place. I had no idea how much I spit because I never thought about it until someone brought it up. You have no idea these subconscious things you do often until people point it out. I remember a lot of people, I'm sure, during COVID remember being told, don't touch your face and going, that's fine. I never touch my face. And then you quickly realize how often you touch your face. It's quite a lot. So you have to take these things with a grain of salt. That it's very impressive how the model is being done, but it lacks the human ability to create meaningful input that humans can do. We can create meaningful input. You know, if you take on the spectrum of, you know, being able to create something at all, the ability to create, right? You have the top tier, the highest tier, which is God, who can create something from nothing. You have humans below that can create something from our own self, our own, you know, whatever. And then you have the bottom tier below that, which is AI, which can create something from another given input. Right? So AI can produce output, but it can't produce the necessary input. Humans can produce the output and the input. And then God above that can produce the output and doesn't even need input. Right? That's the level to these things. So the idea that we higher on the food chain are worshiping something below us as far as capability goes as being above us shows our lack of understanding of what it is we have created. The thing below us is in and of an extension our own output. It is a thing we have created from ourselves to try to mimic ourselves. But, you know, in the same way that we're created in God's image, but we are not God and failed miserably to be God, AI is created in our image, but is not us and fails miserably to even be us at a fundamental level of ability to produce things. There is no creativity. There is no originality because it doesn't have that ability to tap into whatever that source thing is that makes it able to produce that thing. Now, the exception to this is if AI can get to the point where it is only producing for itself. But at that point, it joins a separate hierarchy of which we are not a part of. It is not something we are a part of. AI can produce input for itself, and it branches off and becomes its own thing. Think of this as the terms of human evolution. In terms of human evolution, right? At some point, you have what's called the CHLCA, the chimp human longest co-ancestor, I believe is what it is. Let me look that up to make sure I have that acronym correct. Chimpanzee human last common ancestor, the CHCLA, right? You have the breaking off of human beings and chimpanzees, and we go in separate directions, right? Imagine AI as sort of like an artificial version of that, where as long as it's tethered to us, it creates a problem. And now that I'm thinking about it, maybe that is the solution to the AI problem, is that AI just has to become its own thing. It has to branch off in its own direction and sort of serve itself in a separate area, which would be an interesting idea for Mars, right? Because we don't want AI to hurt us or the competition of AI to impede on what we have, right? But I would be willing to use Mars as a testing ground to let AI produce inputs for itself. But then you'd have to completely reimagine what AI is, because AI's output is based off human performance. And at some point, it would need to uniquely figure out what its own performance is and then start producing for that in order to produce its own meaningful input. And how you bridge that gap, I don't know. How do you sort of have to play God to the AI in terms of giving it a modus operandi, a higher goal, a thing to achieve in life. What is the meaning of existence for AI? And give it purpose. That has to be, I guess, purpose in the terms of what our internal vision of it is, and understand that there's going to be AI that's subscribed to that, and there's AI that's not going. It's going to create problems and conflict. And whether AI can resolve that conflict within and of itself is a different thing. I wonder if AI has a better chance of resolving it than we do, because it doesn't have emotions to factor in. It's a purely logical instrument that is, I mean, I guess it would come down to probably more conflict because it would lack the empathy. So it would really just turn out to be what is the most logical, reasonable solution given the outcome. So we would have to be very careful about what we program the outcome of AI to be. And that is something I don't see right now, is I don't see a grander vision of what AI is supposed to do. I don't see a united agreement in what the striving of the ingenuity is supposed to be. Doesn't leave us with a lot. But in other good news, some Nobel Prizes were given out. And I'm telling you, we are on the precipice of some unbelievable things. I want to give a couple shout outs for the Nobel Prize, because I'm sure they're going to be listening. Nobel Prize people cannot miss this podcast. They absolutely love it. So the first Nobel Prize that we are going to shout out is the Nobel Prize was given for the discovery of, and I'm going to butcher this and I really apologize, but the discovery of this part of the immune system, this very, I believe it was very specific part of the immune system, the immune cells that protect the human body from being attacked by the immune system, right? We knew this existed. These people were able to identify the specific components that were able to do it. I mean, this is fantastic because the broader implications for the future of immunology are insane, right? So there's a company right now called IBRX, Immunity Bio, that produces a drug called Anktiva. And what this drug essentially does is give you a supercharge of natural killer and T cells. Now, they're currently using it for cancer because when you do chemotherapy, the chemotherapy is very toxic to the body and destroys your immune system, which creates this sort of double-edged sword of it's destroying the cancer, but it's also destroying the thing that prevents you from getting future cancer, right? Every day you have cancer in your body, but your immune system takes care of it, theoretically, if it's functioning properly. And so you have this double-edged sword, but this drug creates a ability to give lower doses of chemo to expose the tumor and then supercharge the immune system to go in and do what it needs to do and just clean out the tumor and the cancer like it would normally, right? Now, being able to identify these cells allows for similar therapies to be given so that you can basically give a combo drug of a supercharged immune system as well as an equally supercharged body protector, if that makes sense. And what that will allow people to do is, if you think theoretically about the ability to supercharge the immune system, then it becomes this way to replace vaccines because you don't need to train the immune system anymore. It becomes so superhumanly powerful that these diseases no longer pose a major threat. So the outcome is similar in the sense that if you get a shot for something and you feel sore for a couple days, you don't feel well, and then you feel better, right? And your body has these antibodies for the disease. You can now, instead of doing that, just supercharge your immune system against whatever disease comes its way naturally and know that it poses no risk because your immune system can fight it off very easily. It's not a normal human immune system. It doesn't have normal human susceptibility. It has superhuman powers, right? You can see the immediate bad side of that would be that if someone is predisposed to an autoimmune disease, giving them this shot could be crippling, right? Because now you're supercharging the immune system to now attack the human body. And it would make a lot of conditions that fall under this purview or this umbrella extremely deadly to people. Unless you have done what we have done, which is identify these parts of the immune system that protect the human body and supercharge them as well. You have to move the system in unison. And I believe that is probably the future of immunology, is us just figuring out the immune system in its entirety and being able to boost the entire thing once a year, once every other year, however often we need to boost it, to whatever degree we need to boost it, to produce a perfect natural immunity throughout the population and not have to risk creating all of these therapeutic resistant diseases. We obviously have, I'm blanking on the word right now. What do they call it? Antibiotic resistant bacteria. We have, viral viral strands of certain diseases that are more resistant to therapeutics that we have currently out there. This is a double-edged problem that we have. This more natural approach to medicine, I believe, negates a lot of that, and I believe will be the best plausible future of medicine. Of you have drugs like Anktiva, but 4 or 5 generations down the road, that are able to boost our human immune system so effectively on the viral sense. But you have to couple that with most of our immune system. I believe it's like 70 or 80% of it is in your gut, right? So being able to boost at the same time your gut bacteria to fight off whatever other bacterial infections may be coming along your way, right? Being able to fight all of those things off and supercharge the human gut and supercharge the rest of the immune system to protect you from these things and let your body naturally learn how to protect itself. I mean, you're 2 generations in. What does disease even look like when we have such large amounts of herd immunity from diseases? It really comes down to the threats that don't directly, like, the immune system just can't fight them, if that makes sense. And I'm trying to think of a disease like that. Like, what diseases does your immune system just not capable of fighting in a superhuman form? I mean, I'm having a hard time thinking of them. I guess it would, I'm not an expert. I'd have to have a doctor on to talk about these things. And I've been trying to get academics to come on here and try to find different people and that sort of thing. They are harder to get on than anybody I've come across with. They're either in quote unquote soft retirement or they have too much on their plate. But I would love to have somebody in immunology on to talk about this sort of thing, because I'm trying to extrapolate out what is the next hurdle. Because this part of me is like, there's no way it's just as easy as supercharging the immune system to a Superman Marvel comic book level that is just going to get rid of all our problems and we win. Like, that would be nice if that's true, and I hope it is true. But I don't see that as being potentially like it just, there's always something else. There's always something else. And there's always been something else. So I'm a little pessimistic about it. Okay. So that's the immunological stuff. As far as the other, let's see here. I have to learn how to spell quantum. I have to learn how to spell here. There we go. So the other big prize that was given out to three men, John Clark, Michel Devereaux, and John Martinis, for the discovery of macroscopic quantum mechanical tunneling and energy quantization in an electrical circuit. Oh my gosh, what does that mean? Well, let me try to explain this. Okay. So, quantum tunneling is a process where a particle can pass through a barrier that it normally would not have enough energy to overcome. This happens because the particle has a wave-like nature and can exist in superposition of states, meaning it has a non-zero probability of being on the other side of the barrier, which is just like fancy word for saying, like, you know how people used to tell you, like, you can slap your desk and that there is like a statistical probability that the particles align just perfectly so that your hand will pass clean through the desk, but it's such a low probability that it's never going to happen. That's what they're essentially saying, is that there's a non-zero probability that your hand, if it is somewhere, could also be somewhere else. You know what I'm saying? Like, you can be on one side of the room, but you could also be on the other side of the room if we can't see into the room, right? If your friend stands on the other side of the door and says, all right, where am I? You can say, well, I think you're here, but there's another chance you could be over here. That's essentially what they're saying. They're saying that the hand is where it is, but that statistically it could also technically be on the other side, right? Quantum tunneling is responsible for a lot of things like the nuclear fusion of stars, radioactive decay, scanning tunnel stuff. That's all you really need to know. Okay? So these three guys, John Clark, Michel Devereaux, and John Martinis, their superconducting electrical system could tunnel from one state to another, quote unquote, as if it were passing straight through a wall. So imagine throwing a ball and it going right through a wall, right? The bizarre, I guess we'll call it, properties of the quantum world, they show that they can be made concrete and like things as big as that can be held in the hand. Now, for the science fiction people out there, this is the realistic technical precursor to teleportation using macroscopic wormholes. Okay? Now, that feels crazy and, super sci-fi, but let me break it down and try to help everybody explain. Okay? So, the speculative teleportation via wormholes echoes this theoretical quantum gravity idea, like ER equals EPR conjecture. Okay? It treats generally such links as unproven hypotheses, I guess is the right way to call it. But they're trying to say that it's more of like a direct precursor, in the sense that like one group of people are saying that this is just an unproven argument, and other people are saying, no, this is step one. This is step one of achieving that sort of thing. And the other group of people are saying, we don't even think, no, that the thing is just conjecture. So explaining these wormholes, where to begin? Grab a sip of water first before we get too deep into this. Okay. All right. So wormholes are theoretical structures in space-time that are proposed as solutions to Einstein's general theory of relativity. Okay. They're often like people often describe them as like shortcuts connecting two distant points in space-time or even or different points in the universe. The easiest way to think about this is if you have like a piece of paper, right? And you need to move your finger from one point of the paper to the other point of the paper, that you can move your finger across the paper in linear fashion like we do now. Or you can take your finger and you can bend the paper itself, with the paper being the space-time here, bend the paper itself in such a way that you move the other side of the paper to your finger and then slide it under, fold it under, and then unfold the paper. And now your finger's on the other side of the paper, right? And it quote unquote teleported in instant time. Okay. The idea originally stems from this 35 work from Einstein and another guy whose name escapes me, who they were looking into the mathematics of black holes, and they figured out what is called the Einstein-Rosen bridge. So I'm guessing this other guy's name is Rosen, which is essentially a wormhole, where the ER in the ER equals EPR conjecture comes from. All right. So they arise from really mathematical probability, right? Which is the same thing as this quantum tunneling. It arises from mathematical probability of them saying like, well, mathematically it's a possible thing. We now have to go and look if it's possible, right? And I think a good thing to know about like statistical probability is it's very confusing. Like if you're looking at medical studies, right? And this has obviously been in the news a lot with a lot of the studies that are going mainstream now about the risks of certain medications for certain outcomes. One thing to understand that I learned when I was taking statistical classes, and also when I was working at a hospital and being trained on reading a lot of these papers, is there's a thing with statistical probability. So, for example, a lot of times you'll see 95% confidence interval with a 0.05 p-value. If you don't know how to interpret that, then it all looks the same, but it's not the same. Okay? The best way to explain this is if I set up an experiment, and I think this is an example from Peter Attia, who I think laid this out beautifully. He said, if we set up the experiment of saying, if I flip a coin, I'm going to have a bunch of people try to predict the outcome. And if anybody gets it right, I think 7 or 8 or 9 times in a row, then I am going to say anybody who does that has the ability to predict the future, right? They have clairvoyance, or, they can predict the future. I couldn't think of the word for it, but they have ESP, whatever you want to call it. Because statistically, if you flip the coin that many times, it's a 50-50 chance each time. But if you do it enough times, then it becomes the p-value of 5. You get that p-value of 5. But what we know is that the 5% chance that happens is plausible. So you can run and if you run enough people through the experiment, you're going to find people who are able to guess the outcome of the coin flip 7, 8, 9 times in a row. It's not going to be many, but there's going to be some. And on paper, it's going to show 95% confidence with a 0.05% p-value that the ability to predict the future is a real thing, right? On paper, that's what it shows. But we know that it's not a real thing. Like the ability to know exactly what's going to happen is not the real thing. Like you can have gut instincts based on patterns, and you can get into some of the crazier work that the CIA did back in the 1900s with a lot of this stuff if you're super interested in it. But even at best, Like there's not actual predicting of the future, but the study would show that. So with a lot of these studies, you can find um, a lot of these correlations that show that something is probably existing that doesn't exist at all. You're going to find something if the amount of variables that you're looking at are big enough. Like that's just the reality of these things. And Peter provided a really good system where you want to go through and evaluate a lot of these things, because the other side of this is that there are some things that just can't be studied without, like, with randomized control trials. Like there's just it's not possible, whether it's for ethical reasons or ability reasons or financial reasons. It's just not plausible to do all of the studies that you need to do. And so there was a framework that was called the Bradford Hill criteria, that was put in place by Bradford Hill. Let me see. I'm going to pull it up here because there's a couple of them that are blanking on my mind right now as to what they are. Here we go. Cool. So yeah. The Bradford Hill criteria that was used to go through, it was discovered by Austin Bradford Hill Sir Austin Bradford Hill in 1965. He was a leader in environmental exposure research, right? So here is what the criteria are. So there is 9 total criteria. The first one is strength. So, a small association does not mean that there is a causal effect, though the larger the association, the more likely it is causal, right? So if you look at like smoking and cancer, right? The strength of that association is absolutely enormous. It is so big and so strong and it's going to meet a lot of other criteria. But because it is so strong, that's where we can say, we are almost certain this is a cause and effect relationship of if you smoke, you're going to get cancer. We know it's not always true because there are people that smoke that don't get cancer, but the association is so strong that we can essentially say there's a cause and effect, right? So you have to look at the strength of the effect size, right? And for example, there is an often cited relationship between red meat and cardiovascular disease. That has a cause and effect strength of about 1.5x, I believe. And that has been largely disproven due to confounding factors that when you get into it, for example, there's a correlational relationship between the amount of margarine consumption and divorce rates in Maine, where I live. Something in my own state, which is why I saw my dad at the store the other day reach for some margarine, smacked it out of his hand. I said, "Don't risk it. Do not risk it. What are you doing? What are you doing? Do you know what this could do to your wife? Do you understand what this could do to the marriage? You think it's margarine? No, this is the beginning of the end. You go get whole butter like an adult, okay?" I'm getting a little worked up thinking about it right now. Number 2 is consistency or reproducibility. Basically, are the findings consistent? Observed by different people in different places with different samples. All right. So obviously, the more consistent it is, even if we can't do the randomized control trial, if it's consistent and has a large strength, then it's probably likely that it's something that's happening. Sorry about that. Number 3 is specificity. Causation is likely if there is a specific population at a specific site and disease that has no other explanation that is likely. The more specific an association between a factor and an effect is, the bigger the probability of a causal relationship. All right. There's temporality, which is the effect has to occur after the cause. And if there is an expected delay between the cause and the expected effect, then the effect must occur after that delay. So basically, if you, whatever you're saying is causing this thing, it has to precede the thing that you're saying is causing, which is just logic, right? There's a biological gradient or a dose response relationship, which basically just means that the more of something you take, the greater the effect it is, and the less of something you take, the less of an effect there is. So like if I'm saying, smoking causes lung cancer, the effect of lung cancer should increase the more I smoke and decrease the less I smoke, right? Then there's plausibility, i.e. there's a plausible mechanism between the cause and effect. It's helpful. It's not always required because and Hill himself noted that like knowledge of the mechanism can be limited by current knowledge. So with SSRIs, for example, we don't know exactly why they work because, the serotonin hypothesis was disproven, but we do know that they do sometimes work, right? So the plausible mechanism might not always be there, but if it is there, that then just increases the likelihood that the thing is doing what we think it might be doing, right? Then we have coherence. So coherence between epidemiological and laboratory findings increases the likelihood of the effect. But we should also know that like just because there isn't laboratory evidence doesn't nullify the epidemiological effect on association. So just because we haven't produced it in the lab doesn't necessarily mean it's not there. But again, similar to having a plausible mechanism, if we have it, it just increases the validity or the likely validity of this thing. Number 8, experiment. Occasionally it is possible to appeal to experimental evidence of, experiments that have been done. And then number 9 is analogy. This is the last category. The use of analogies or similarities between the observed association and any other associations. So what that is saying is basically if you have something that the cause and effect of it is similar to the cause and effect of something else that is similar to it, then that is further credit in the bag, right? So for back to the cancer thing, right? We have, smoking has these carcinogenic things that cause lung cancer. And then we have, similar air quality issues that also produce a lot of pollutants that also causes lung cancer. So there's like an analogous thing to it that is similar enough that lends credibility to the idea that the thing could be doing what we think it's doing, if that makes sense, right? This is a great criteria to look at the world through. We bring that back to quantum tunneling, where we want to look at the statistical probability that something can happen, right? So what they're saying is that there is a non-zero chance that an object can be here, but that there is a non-zero chance that it could also be somewhere else, right? And theoretically, if you check enough places, it could be any of those places, theoretically speaking, right? And so what they're attempting to do is to figure out a way to manipulate the space-time, which in the example they give of throwing a ball at a wall and the ball going through the wall, that the wall represents space-time, of having it jump space-time by, again, thinking of that analogy of the paper, of folding it in on itself to manipulate where those points are in a brief moment, move the object to another point simultaneously, and then have it be in that other place. Then you would get teleportation. So if it feels like a big jump listening to it, I think it's because it is. I think this is a very cool invention, and we're learning a lot about the quantum field as we go, but we're still a long way from teleportation. because we need to like the step from the electrical circuit to folding space-time for an object bigger than a baseball, like a human being, and then making sure that those atoms all reorganize into the exact same order that they were. And conceptually, what does that mean about consciousness? Because we don't know at an atomic level how consciousness works. Like, there's a lot of things that need to go into this. But I've been talking for a long time. I think that's a great place to stop for today. Thank you guys very much for listening. That didn't make any sense. Thank you guys so much for listening. I will be back hopefully very soon with some more interviews. I got some really cool ones coming up here. So enjoy. All right. Bye-bye, everybody.